So today what we're talking about, and again I invite you to feel what you're feeling. Notice how you're feeling about these things. Don't try to interpret, don't try to analyze, but just witness your reaction, witness your feeling. As these ideas just kind of pass through and pass around and interact with us. Today we're talking about this idea of letting go. The title is, what's holding you back? What's holding you back? Now the first thing that implies, and we want to talk about that briefly, the first thing that implies is that we should be moving in some way. We should be progressing. Now everything that we know of in life, everything is in constant change. It is in constant movement. I looked it up one time. You can go look it up on the internet, but we roughly spend an hour together on a Sunday morning. And during that 1 hour's time, a spot on the equator will have rotated 1,000 miles. The Earth itself will have moved, I think it's like 18,000 miles around the sun, but I could be wrong. The sun itself moves in the galaxy, and the galaxy itself moves in the universe. Everything is in constant motion, and the funny part, to me, the humorous part, is that we as human beings, we seem to want certainty and consistency. Certainty and consistency. We want to know. We want to know for sure how things are. We want to make a decision with our intellect. We want to decide. We want to be certain. And we want things to stay the same. And of course, we live in a universe in which nothing is the same from moment to moment. Even those things that we consider to be solids, bricks and concrete and metal and things like that. If you go down to the atomic level, if we look at the atoms and the molecules in there, we can see things are moving, or at least the physicists will tell us that things are moving. Electrons whirling around protons and neutrons, forming a nucleus. Things moving around, bumping into one another. I mean, it's just amazing when you think about it. We put a cup of water in the microwave and press the button, and it comes out a minute later and it's hot. And it became hot because the microwave excited the molecules in there, and the molecules ran around and bumped into one another, causing heat. We don't think of that. We don't think of that. We tend to think of heat as something that you impart into the fluid by putting it on a burner on the stove. But even with that, the molecules are running around, bumping into one another. If we go down to the subatomic level, we have the subatomic particles that are also whirling around and moving around and coming into and out of existence, is what we're told. Sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not there. Everything in life is in motion. Everything in life is moving. If you think about the experience that you and I have in this life here, it is constantly changing. It is never the same. We can look back and we can remember, especially with Christmas coming, we can remember times when we were children. And the interesting thing is we don't just kind of observe that time that we were children. We go back to it. We sort of re-experience it. It is as if we are there again. Sometimes we can smell it. If, for example, it's a feast where we're eating a big meal with the family, we might be able to taste it. You remember being at Thanksgiving dinner at a big family gathering, for example, and sitting at the kids' table, which was an ironing board with a tablecloth on it. All of these things, we call them memories, but we're really kind of still identifying with them. We are still experiencing them when we go back in time in our memory. And yet we're not that child anymore. The body that little one had is long gone. It is turned into dust. It's not there anymore. The bodies that we have now, we're told, we didn't have 2 years ago. Even to the bone. That each cell has been replaced with newer cells. Now we still kind of recognize this body. We identify with it. We say it's us, and it's not us. But we say it's us. We say it's our body. But it has changed. You see, it has changed. Now some changes occur slowly over time, and we barely notice them. It's the boiled frog syndrome that we used in the training courses. Things happen slowly, and we come to slowly accept them, and we barely notice that they've changed. Growing old is like that. And other changes happen abruptly, and we're keenly aware of them. And typically we don't, as human beings, we don't do well with those kind of changes. You get laid off from work. You have to move to a different city. There's an illness. There's a death. All of these things, you see. Sudden changes. In some respects, what we tend to do in order to take our mind away from change, away from the fact that everything is changing, away from the inevitability of death, we try to pretend that everything is staying the same. We try to create a delusion. We try to create something that is not real in itself. And as long as we can stay in that delusion, as long as we can pretend that the world is not changing, we somehow feel safe. We somehow feel okay. This is if you go back to doo-wop music. For those of you who are not old enough, if you Google it, it'll come up. If you go back to the doo-wop music, this is kind of the really sticky romance, teenage love songs. As long as I'm with you, life is wonderful, and I don't need anything else, and all these kind of things. This is an illusion that we create, that things won't change, and therefore we can avoid dealing with the change. But the point there is that life is all about change. Everything is changing, and we too are changing. And if you look at the progression of life, it seems that we should be continuing to change. We didn't come here to stay in one place. We came here to grow, to expand. And that growth and expansion is in consciousness. In consciousness. We have come to realize more of what reality is and to escape the delusions of mind. To move away from the stories that we have bought into and we have believed to be true. And to come to know ourselves, to come to know what God is, as best we can. And as I said in the opening treatment, that's not an intellectual exercise. God is not a mathematical problem to be solved, but an experience of unity to witness, to observe, to experience. So if we look at the evolution, the physical evolution of life on the planet, as Thomas Troward would tell us, is that it is constantly been moving forward with every leap of evolution, with every advancement of evolution. Two things have been happening. Life has been moving to a greater degree of freedom in terms of physical mobility, in terms of free will and choice, moving into a greater degree of freedom, and it is moving into a greater degree of awareness, of consciousness, of intelligence. So if we were to just stop there, if we would just stop there and think about it, we might be able to look at that and kind of draw out, extrapolate, and say, well then, it would seem that we, as individualized expressions of God, that we should be continuing to advance in freedom and in consciousness and in awareness. So that's when I say, if we start out with the statement of what's holding you back, there's an assumption there that you should be moving. And the assumption that I'm tossing out there is that the way that we should be moving is we should be constantly, as Dr. Holmes says, deliberately, steadfastly, we should be consciously moving forward in our growth, in our spiritual growth, in our awareness, in our understanding, in our freedom to be and to express the beautiful life that has created us out of itself. If we're looking kind of for a very broad brush definition of purpose, then that might be one that we could start with. So the example I gave last night in the email was that when we lived down in Carolina Beach, we lived right on a canal and we had a sailboat tied to the dock out there. You know, I just needed to run the engine to go about a mile to the inlet, and once I cleared the sea buoy out there, and the sails were up and the wind was blowing, in theory, I could take that boat anywhere that I wanted to go. Anywhere in the world that the ocean touched, in theory, I could go there. Now, practicality, it wasn't so practical. It was like the old fisherman's prayer: "It's a very small boat in a very big ocean." How much supplies could it hold? How much time did you have? All of those things. But in theory, we could set out. Bermuda was less than a week away from the inlet if we wanted. Some places in the Bahamas. One of the fellows I was talking with had a big sailboat, and he sailed down the Bahamas. And I think he said he made it back in 72 hours straight sail. So the potential was there. The potential of freedom was there. But unless I let go the dock lines, unless I untied from the dock, I wasn't going anywhere. So in that example, I had the ability to move, but there was something I needed to let go of. There was something that I needed to let go of before I could disembark. So I could buy all the charts. I could check my compass to make sure that it was calibrated. I could tune the radios. I could do everything that I needed to do. I could fill the boat up with as much food and water as it would hold. I could check the sails and the rigging and make sure everything was in good working order. But that wasn't enough. See? The planning wasn't enough. The decision to go wasn't enough. I had to let go of the dock lines. So when we start to think about moving forward, if you look at self-help psychology books, they're pretty much all going to say kind of the same thing. You have to decide. Everything starts with a decision. Raymond Charles Barker said this: the power of decision. You have to decide. You have to decide that you're going to change. You have to decide that you're going to move forward. And then, of course, you have to make your plan. You have to plan for it. You have to organize. You have to motivate yourself. Napoleon Hill said to kind of stoke up your desire into a white heat. What is it that you want out of life, and what are you prepared to do for it? And can you get yourself excited about that? I worked with a guy one time who shared with me that the way he got himself ready for the day was when he got out of bed in the morning and he got in the shower, he used to start yelling. He used to start, kind of like you see sometimes football players on the sidelines getting themselves worked up into a frenzy before the game. And he would do that before he would go to work. Now, he was a very competitive fellow, and his idea was that work was a competition, it was a struggle, and there were other companies out there that were trying to take the business that he wanted, and he was going to get out there and he was going to win, and he kind of worked himself up into that frenzy before he got in the car and drove to the office. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, this guy's driving and he's got himself all worked up like that, But that's kind of what popular wisdom tells us to do. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't make a decision. I would agree 100%. Everything starts with a decision, a decision to change, a decision to grow, a decision to move forward. We have to then kind of do the ordinary things that go along with that decision. We have to make our plans. We have to do our research. We have to do due diligence. We have to start to think about what is it going to take, and what assets do I have, and what assets do I need, and what skills do I have, and all things like that. But unless and until we are willing to let go of whatever is keeping us the way we are, we're not going anywhere. We're not moving anywhere. We're still tied to the dock. We are tied to the dock by right of consciousness. We must at least be aware of that. Things are the way they are for a reason or reasons. We are the way we are for a reason or reasons. And if I say I want to change, sometimes I can do that if it's a very easy change, a very simple change. But other times I can't. Other times I can't because something inside of me is so deeply convinced that I should not move in the direction I want to move, or I need to stay where I am. That no matter what I try to do, I can't leave. I sabotage myself. I fail. I get distracted. All of these other things. And the reason for that is because we haven't let go of whatever it is that we need to let go of. So we just need to be aware of that. And when we are doing our spiritual practice, when we're doing treatment, usually when we get down to the third step of saying what we accept, I usually include a statement in there that says, and I am willing to let go of everything I need to let go of in order for this demonstration to come about. And to me, that's very important because sometimes we want all kinds of new things. We want things to change, but we don't want to let go of the old. We don't want to let go. And we can't have it both ways. We can't have it both ways. We can't be clinging to the old and trying to bring the new in. It won't work. It may work on a temporary basis, but eventually we'll lose the new because we haven't changed our consciousness. We haven't changed our consciousness to align with the new. Emmett Fox, in his book on the Ten Commandments, he talks about thou shalt not steal. He says, now, and at surface level, it's good advice, right? It's kind of an ethical code that reinforces a moral law. Everybody knew even thousands of years ago that you don't steal from your neighbor. It's not a good thing to do. So he asks us to consider the setting that we are given in the Old Testament, and God itself comes down and appears to Moses in the form of the burning bush. which is a metaphor for deep meditation. But God itself appears to Moses. The ground trembles, there's smoke and there's fire and all these dramatic scenes that were given in the Bible. And God says, tell them not to take the neighbor's shoes. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's more to the commandment than we see on the surface. And Emmett Fox goes on to say that what it is trying to tell us is you cannot get and retain what you don't have the consciousness for. If you have not grown in consciousness to grow into it, you're not going to be able to keep it. And so the newspapers are full of stories of people who have won the lottery and within a few years they were just as broke or more so. They did not have the consciousness that went with properly using that money. So what we want to consider then is that our purpose in life, or the way that we live life, requires us to grow. It requires us to grow. And in growth, it is more than just deciding about where we want to go or what we want to do. It is also about letting go of the things that have been keeping us where we are. Now, I'm not saying it is a bad thing that they were keeping us the way we are. Right? They kept us alive. But it's time to let go. It's time to let go. So we come into the world, as we've been talking for the last few weeks, we kind of come into the world and we're in this little isolated box. Buddhism says we come into consciousness like a monkey inside a locked house. We can look out through the windows, the 5 windows of the 5 senses. But our world is inside that house. Our experience is inside that house. And we kind of have that experience with our identity, with who and what we think we are. So one of the things that I learned going through life is sometimes it helps if we want to let go of the ideas of who and what we are. Sometimes it helps to go back and reflect on it. How did we get those ideas? I chuckle because sometimes I go, how in the world would that make sense? Why would anybody believe that? But yet, as a kid growing up, we're told all kinds of things, and we believe all kinds of things, and those things go right on affecting us through our adult life until we take action, hopefully deliberate action, to let them go, So as we come into life, the Buddhists tell us we kind of come into the world and the game is already in progress. We don't know who started the game. We don't even know what the object of the game is. We just know that there's this game going on, and we're sitting there trying to figure it out. What is this game that's going on around us, and how do I participate in it? So what we tend to do, this is my experience, in looking into these things, is we tend to observe something or have an experience of something, and we assign a meaning to that. We analyze it, right? So remember we were talking about first there's the perception or just is, and then there's this part of us that starts to assign meanings to the perception. And the meaning that we assign to whatever happened really, in many cases, this depends on where we were at that time and what was going on around us. And the meaning that we assign to things, the importance that we assign to things, the conclusions that we reach, the assumptions that we make, in many cases are not true. They're not true at all. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the intellect. It doesn't matter to the ego, unless later on in life you come up against that brick wall, that issue, and then you have to go back and say, oh, well, I always believed it was this way, but I guess it's not. It stays with us, so we're still carrying around all of these ideas that are literally half-baked ideas. So W. Clement Stone, in one of his books, I think it was Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude, he gives us an example of he was a traveling salesman. He went from city to city and he sold insurance. So he spent many a night and ate many a meal in a hotel. And I'm going to get a sip of water here. I'm starting to get gravelly. So if you've ever done that, travel a lot, after a while you kind of get tired of eating the same old things in the hotels. I mean, there was times where I just wished I had a hot plate and a can of soup, from the grocery store. So W. Clement Stone said that there were frog legs on the menu, and he had never had frog's legs, and all his friends told him that frog's legs were good. So he ordered them, and he said they were terrible. They were terrible. He just didn't like them at all. They were sour. They tasted terrible. He didn't like them. So he decided, he made a decision, he made an observation, he made an analysis. He decided that he didn't like frog's legs, that frog's legs were no good. Excuse me. And then he went for like the next 20 years and he never ate frog's legs. And one night he was out at a dinner and he sat down with a bunch of colleagues and they were having dinner and there were frog legs on the menu and somebody said to him, "Oh, you got to try the frog's legs here. The frog's legs here are the best." And he said, "Nah, I really don't like frog's legs." I tried them once, didn't like them. He said, "Oh, you got to try them again because the frog legs here, they're absolutely the best." He said, "I really don't want to do it." And the waiter jumps in and says, "Oh yeah, the frog legs, they're a specialty. You just absolutely love them." So W. Clement Stone says, well, he decided then that the frog legs that he had 20 years ago, they were jumbo frog's legs. And maybe it was just the jumbo frog's legs that weren't any good. So he asked the waiter, and he said, well, are they the jumbo or are they regular kind? And the waiter says, they're the regular kind. So W. Clement Stone says, okay, I'll try them. And of course, when they came, they were jumbo. They were jumbo frog's legs. They were as big as the ones he had 20 years before. So here he is, he has this plate of frog legs in front of him. He knows he doesn't like frog's legs. He remembers how bad they taste. And yet his friends are all egging him on. Oh, you got to try. Go ahead, take a bite. So he did, and they were delicious. They were delicious. And what he came to realize, and the point he's making in his book is, what he came to realize is that his decision about frog's legs was based on a bad experience. And he came to an improper conclusion that he didn't like frog's legs instead of those frog legs were bad. And that affected his behavior for the next 20 years of his life. So then he started to wonder what other things might he believe to be true that are not true, that are still affecting his behavior. That's exactly what we are talking about here. So we are born into this existence and we are basked in a human identity. We are given a name. We are given a home. We are given a family. We are given all these different things and they start to form our identity. We start to form a belief about who we are and the way things ought to be. But what we have to come to realize is that identity, those beliefs, are nothing more than ideas. They are nothing more than opinions. That's all they are. And as things took place around us as we were growing up, we assigned meaning to them. We decided that meaning was the correct meaning, and then we lived the rest of our lives, or we live the rest of our lives according to that belief in what is right and what is wrong and who we are and who we are not, which are all just subjective opinions. All just subjective opinions. So our growth then, our spiritual growth, is in breaking with that identity, is in breaking with it. We are not our opinion of ourselves. We are not. We are the one who is aware of the opinion of ourselves, but we are not the opinion that we hold of ourselves. Everything that we have decided about life as we went through life is probably not true. And it's not important. So we need to be able to let all of that go. We need to be able to release and to let go. To release and to let go. We have been told that we are only human, and that's not true. We may have been told that the spiritual experience, this is true in my life, that the spiritual experience, the experience of the presence of God, well, that was something that only the saints who could be afforded the opportunity to go live in a monastery somewhere or convent somewhere and spend their entire day in spiritual practice and in prayer, that experience, the mystical experience, was reserved for them. But the ordinary person that I was, growing up in the ordinary neighborhood that I grew up in, well, I could never hope to have such an experience. And of course, that's not true. So we have to let go of the things that we may have bought into as we were growing up that are acting in effect as the dock lines that are keeping us tied in place. If you can still get a copy of it somewhere, Dr. Maxwell Maltz wrote a book in the 60s, I think it's called Psycho-Cybernetics. And Maltz was a plastic surgeon, and in fact he used to come from time to time and he would do guest talks at Dr. Raymond Charles Barker's Church of Religious Science in New York City. Excuse me. But what Maltz realized was that people would come to him, some people would come to him, and he would look at them and not see anything out of the ordinary. And yet they insisted that they had some kind of a grotesque deformity that he needed to correct, needed to adjust their nose or their ear or their lip or something like that. He'd look at it and say, well, there's nothing wrong there. Oh, no, it's terrible. I need to have it changed. And if he did the surgery and modified that body part, the people would still say, oh my God, it's worse than ever. It's terrible. And he's looking at it, and from his point of view, everything's perfect. Did a perfect job as a surgeon. And he said other people would come and they would really have something that was deformed. And he might ask if they wanted to change it, and they would say, what are you talking about? Why? Why would I want to change that? What's the matter with my nose? It's perfect just the way it is. So he came to realize that it was the self-image that people held. It was what they perceived themselves to be was more important than what actually was. And that's what we're talking about here. We all have this self-image. We all have this idea of who and what we are that we developed as we grew up. And it's time to let that go. It's time to let loose the dock lines. Now there's two things that we have to consider there when we get to that. So just let me give you an example. So if we start to say, well, can I go out and can I do this thing that will allow me to express life more fully? I want to step into that and I want to do that. Can I go out and do that? Well, we know that we live in a spiritual universe. We know that we live in a universe that is unlimited in itself, that ideas are plentiful, that there's enough money. I can't remember how much it is, but somebody figured out one time, so there's enough money in circulation so that each one of us, if we all had it shared, each one of us would have more money than we could possibly need for the rest of our lives. So there's plenty of money to do projects and things like that. We understand that. And then we start to get into the self-limiting ideas, which says, but can I do that? Or how's the money going to come to me? And all those kind of things. And immediately we start to fall back into this self-image of not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough. I'm trying to do this all by myself. All of those kind of things. So it's one thing to just say, well, no, you don't understand. See, you live in an unlimited universe, and there's a spiritual law. It's done unto you according to your belief. And if you pray believing in your heart, the ways and means will make themselves known to you. It's one thing to say that. And it's another thing to let go of the things that are kind of in the way, that are keeping us from believing that, you know. When Ken Burns did the documentary on the Civil War, there was a historian in there who would, you know, come in and tell stories from time to time. And he was telling a story of a private who got called before General Lee for court-martial, and the boy was standing there shaking. And General Lee said, "Son, you don't need to be scared. I'm going to be fair with you." And the boy said, "That's what I'm scared of. That's what I'm scared of." So there was something within him that knew. And I think we're all a little bit like that. We hear the words, we hear the idea that you're a beautiful expression of God, but then there's part of us that says, yeah, but I'm scared. I'm only human. Okay, so now, a couple of things we want to do, a couple of things we want to talk about. So we want to create a space, right? We want to create a space, and then we want to fill that space with the truth. This is Emma Curtis Hopkins. She talks about denials and affirmations. Denials and affirmations. The denial creates a space, and then the affirmation fills that space. Denials and affirmations. That's the way she uses them in the way that she teaches spiritual practice. So the first thing that we want to do is break our identity. Break our identity. And one way to do that is to see life, to see the past as a dream. Just as a dream. So in going back to that childhood event I told you about, and going back to sitting there at the Thanksgiving table, at the kids' table, which was an ironing board with a tablecloth on it, and smelling the turkey and hearing your cousins and all of those other things, can we just see that as we were watching something on television? In other words, not identify with it, but identify with the witness, identify with the observer. See, that's what we were. That's what's so consistent. When we were 5 years old, when we were 25 years old, when we were 50 years old, the only thing that was consistent is the observer. So we must now start to identify with the witness, with the observer. So Osho gives us an example in some of his work. He says, when you lay down at night to go to sleep, just unwind, but go backwards in time. Just go backwards in time and reflect upon what were you doing right before you got in bed. Oh, I brushed my teeth, washed my face, put my jammies on, all those kind of things. What were you doing just before that? Oh, well, I put the cat out, locked the door, whatever. What was I doing just before that? Oh, well, I was watching a TV show. What was I doing just before that? Excuse me. And he invites us then to go back all the way to the morning. All the way to the morning. And he says it's important to work backwards. But as we do it, rather than reliving it, see, if we try to live it forward, if we try to say, well, I got up in the morning and I brushed my teeth and I put the coffee on, I did this, I did that, we become identified with that. But working backwards is kind of a mind trick that helps us to disidentify with it. Now we realize it's just a memory. Now we realize we're just running it through our mind. And when we can learn to go back and look at our entire life, you know, so he says, try going back one day, then try and go back 2 days. Do you remember what happened while you were asleep last night? Do you remember? Can you work backwards through your dreams? How far back can you go? And that in itself is a spiritual practice. Then he says you can go all the way back to the womb. You can go all the way back to the womb. And some teachers say they can go back prior to that. They can go back to the point where their consciousness entered the mother's womb. And in so doing, what happens is we learn not to identify with the individual in those circumstances, but we learn to identify with the witness. See, once we do that, then it becomes much easier to let go of the false ideas and false beliefs that we hold on to that are holding us back. Our purpose is to let go of the human identity and and grow in a deeper and deeper realization of and experience of our spiritual identity. So the longer we hold on to the false identity, which is the human identity, the longer we stay tied to the dock. Sometimes when people are saying, well, they want to go do something, you just say, well, how do you think God would approach that? How do you think God would feel about it? Do you think God would be afraid? Do you think God would be limited? Do you think God would wonder about where the resources are going to come from? The divine makes up its mind, and it is, and it does. And we have to remember that that is the truth of our being. So once we become able to view our past as a dream that we have observed, it becomes much easier for us to let go of the things that are not true. So we can catch ourselves. So we're in the moment, and we might catch ourselves saying something that is limiting. Oh, I wouldn't know how to do that. I don't have the resources to do that. Limiting ideas. So we can catch ourselves right then, and we can deny it and say, that is not the truth. That is not the truth of who I am. That is an erroneous idea that I bought into a long time ago when I was dreaming. Now, what is the truth? That was the denial. What is the affirmation? The truth is that God is all there is. Divine love is all there is. The intelligence that guides the whales from poles to pole leads me where I need to be. That which takes nothing and creates a universe can bring into my experience all of the materials, the goods, the services, the ideas, the helpmates, the financiers, everybody can bring them into my experience for the full and complete expression of whatever this is that I want to do. And as we start to do that, what we come to realize is it's not the project that we're working on that's important. It's the process of letting go of the old ideas and replacing them with the new ideas. That's what is important. So we live in a universe that responds to us according to our belief. Pray, believing in your heart that it is so, and it shall be done. Everything you have experienced is a result of what you have thought. That's what we get in Buddhism. As a man thinks and believes in his heart, so is he. That's what we get from Judaism. We come to realize then that there's this power in the universe, the power by which prayer is answered, that responds to us according to our belief. And then each and every day, what we're doing is we're creating our tomorrow based on what we believe today. And now for most of us and for most of our lives, we believe today exactly what we believed yesterday. Didn't do anything to change it. We believe exactly what we believed yesterday, and guess what tomorrow is going to look like? Remember, today is the tomorrow you prayed for yesterday. So if we wish to grow, which is what I'm saying is our purpose, if we wish to grow in our experience of our spiritual nature, grow in our experience of the unity, grow in our experience of the presence of God, then now, right now, the only moment we have right now is we want to fill our consciousness with ideas about and the belief in the availability of that presence of God. I start this day with gratitude. That's why we talked last week about gratitude. I start this day with gratitude. I am aware of the miracle of life. I am aware of the blessings that surround me. I am aware that I am an individualized expression of the divine, and I am here today as an instrument of its love. See? And sometimes as we're doing that, sometimes as we're making that affirmation, that little voice in the back of our head comes up and says, oh no, And right then we go back into denial and reaffirmation. I like to say, get thee behind me, Satan. Get thee behind me, Satan. Get behind me, idea that divides. Get behind me, ideas of separation. So every day, deliberately, consistently, steadfastly, Dr. Holmes said we stubbornly try to see things as they are. Every day we want to fill our consciousness with the reality of God's love. We can start off by declaring, and I release and let go of everything in consciousness that is not aligned with the truth that God is all that there is. We create that opening. We create that space. And then we fill that space with ideas of love, with ideas of truth. Divine love has created us out of itself and left us alone to make that discovery. This idea that I'm giving today, or letting pass through today, this idea of letting go. See, that's what our growth is. There's nothing more to be added. God is already here. God already is all it's going to be. There's nothing to be added. There's only something to let go of. So let's let go of the old and limiting ideas. Let's cast off the dock lines that have been holding us back. Let's vow to live today like the spiritual beings that we believe we are. Let's spend the time breaking our identity with the past. Right? I am not that memory. I am not that dream. Right? When you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, you get caught up in it because you're identified with it. Now it's time to break that identification. The identification that we have is God is all there is. God is love. God has created us out of itself. And today we let go of every and any idea in consciousness that is not aligned with that truth. Today we are filled with the conscious awareness of the experience of the presence of God. And so it is.